Hi everyone, so a short video today, kind of like a news flash. I've just finished reading this huge tome. Robert M. Place, The Tarot, Magic, Alchemy, Hermeticism and Neoplatonism 3rd edition. And I probably need to digest it for several weeks. I will come back to it later when I do my next roundup of tarot books I didn't like. But for now, I'd just like to give you a very brief sort of indication of the sort of book that it is, so that you can maybe have some idea of whether you want to get it. There are, as far as I know, 2 books by Robert M. Place. He's a prolific designer of tarot cards, and this one is the shorter one, The Tarot History, Symbolism and Divination. And this is a very different kettle of fish. It's a well-produced book. It seems to have been, one detects the presence of an editor and a publishing house, keeping it all kind of like within sort of reasonable limits and readable limits. This book, I think, is a bit of a folly in a way, and I don't mean that meanly, because I think Robert M. Place is a very genuine and likable tarotist in terms of his design work and in terms of his writing. He, at the beginning of the book, he describes a dream that he had when he was kind of like contacted, in a sense, by the spirits of tarot and told to dedicate his life to it. And it's very personal and it's very authentic and it's very touching. But I think, as I say, what we have here is a bit of a folly. I don't think this book should have come out like this. I don't think he does himself any favours. The first thing you notice is that it, and I don't mean this sarcastically, it's a really heavy book. It's printed on the kind of paper that books normally aren't printed on. It's printed on what I would call photographic paper, very thick. It probably weighs at least twice as much as most books with 700 pages weigh. It weighs 1.5 kilos. And so it's a bit like snuggling up in bed with the family Bible. It's not a comfortable experience. You can't ever really relax with it. And I think that kind of paper is completely unnecessary. It's lavishly illustrated, and I really appreciate that. But, you know, you can have a lavishly illustrated book like this one on proper lightweight reading paper, and it's a much, much nicer experience. The book also, I don't think, has been properly proofread, and it would have been easier to read if it had been proofread. I won't pick it apart too unkindly, but I would say that the writer has strange punctuation, very strange punctuation, a very strange use of the comma, ladies and gentlemen. Punctuation is there to make our lives easier. Crazy punctuation makes our lives more difficult as readers. Okay, getting all that out of the way, what you have here is a huge chunk of sort of moderately interesting history of esoteric symbolism with a lot of magic and a lot of alchemy and a lot of hermeticism. Now, I read this book for its tarot content. I don't find alchemy terribly inspiring, but I was hoping that once I'd read, you know, a book of this depth and range about it, I would be inspired. I wasn't. He tells you what alchemists did and said and what their ideas were, but it doesn't really catch fire. You're waiting, you're turning the page and you're waiting for him to tell you why this is exciting and how we can really apply it to our lives. I mean, tarot cards, we can apply it to our lives because we can use them for divination, but alchemy, I'm not sure that we're going to sit down with a test tube and boil up some chemicals and apply that to our lives. And I understand that alchemy is also a psychological metaphor, but I've read Jung and I know that Jung talks about alchemy, but it never came alive for me when Jung talked about it, not particularly. And it doesn't really come alive here either. So you have a huge amount of information, quite a lot about the pagan world and Neoplatonism in the Renaissance. And Robert M. Place is very widely read and very knowledgeable, and he's a very thoughtful person, and he assembles this information very well. But there's a lot of it, and I don't think it really catches fire. So reading the book was actually more of a duty than a pleasure, I felt. There was one chapter in the book where I got excited. It's chapter 12, The History of Cartomancy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, it's less than 20 pages. And we're dealing with a book which is 650 pages long. So you get that very, very nice history of cartomancy and the best history of cartomancy I've ever read, pulling a lot of stuff together. He's done so much work and he sorts out so many misapprehensions about tarot and cartomancy. It's a real pleasure, but I so wish he had maybe brought out this book as 3 different books so that we didn't have to wade through all this other stuff. Now, as the book gets into its second half, it becomes a book which is about Robert M. Place's projects. And it becomes a book which is about 2 of his tarot decks, namely the Tarot of the Sevenfold Mystery and the Alchemical Tarot. He shows you basically how he has arrived at his images. You get here a Marseille image, a Rider-Waite-Smith image, and then Robert M. Place's 2 decks here. The decks are quite nice, but as I will explain to you, I wouldn't read with them myself. They're very, very nicely drawn, and when you see them in colour, they are ravishing, but that's not quite the point for me. Let me tell you what the point is, or at least the sticking point is. The sticking point for me is this, is that Robert M. Place is of the opinion that, well, he's a tarot pack designer, so he would be of this opinion. He's of the opinion that every tarot pack is different. There is no ultimate tarot pack with ultimate meanings, and he's really talking about the pips here, because we all know about the majors. The majors are not really in dispute. We can all use the majors, we can all work with them. We're worried about the other 40 cards in the pips. So Robert M. Place is saying that, he goes along with A.E. Waite and Pamela's pip cards to a certain extent, but not all the way. And where he disagrees, because he's extremely learned, he's done a lot of research, where he disagrees, he will give us a completely different image. And then he says, this is the thing about tarot. When you buy a tarot deck, they're all going to be different, and you have to sit down with the guidebook and find out what the artist thinks each pip card meant. Now, I think life's too short for that personally. I think that you could become a Robert M. Place fan and say, yes, that's my one, I'm going to concentrate on this. And you could mug up on his decks and make that your deck. Or you could become a Paul Hewson fan and get Dame Fortune's Wheels Tarot and mug up on that, and it would be very different from the RWS. But I don't think you're going to get yourself 3, 4, 5, 6 or 10 different tarots with different pip cards and sit down every time you read the tarot and look in the guidebook and look up the meaning. And then Robert M. Place says, well, you don't have to look in the guidebook, you can just stare at the card. Well, yes, maybe, but some of his images are really wacky. They're great, but they're surrealistic. I'll show you what I mean. Like here we have the 4 of Cups. It's an elephant walking on 4 cups. Now that's very different from Pamela. And what does it mean? And it does mean something, yeah, but are you going to get there just by staring at it? I also think that as he goes into the pips and as he diverges from Pamela Coleman Smith, it's mainly around the 7s, 8s, 9s and 10s that he stops giving us RWS imagery. I think that's because numerology becomes less gripping as you get into the higher reaches of the numbers, the 7s, 8s, 9s and 10s. I mean, everyone sort of intuitively knows what 2 means. It's duality, and you kind of know that 4 is stability, and you kind of know that 3 is movement. But I don't think people have an intuitive, deep knowledge of, 7. You can 7's kind of lucky, isn't it, and kind of holy. But do people generally have a feeling for what 8 means, or what 9 means, or what 10 means? So many esoteric people say that 9 and 10 mean, the same kind of thing. I think Pamela's 8s, 9s and 10s are extremely good and extremely interesting. And I think Robert M. Place's 8s, 9s and 10s in his decks are not. I think they become very repetitive. I'll show you, let me give you an example. There's his 9 of battens, so a bird flying over 9 burning battens. And there's the 10 of battens, a bird flying over 10 burning battens. And I'm not terribly inspired. And then, to cap it all, he says the great thing about Lenormand is that the meanings are always the same. You can just pick up a Lenormand deck and just read with it. And I think to myself, so why do we have to suffer? Okay, that's a very personal opinion. I admire Robert M. Place. I think he's a fantastic draftsman. I really share his taste. His last tarot is based on the work of Edward Burne-Jones, who's one of my absolute favourite artists. So I think if I met him, I would like him, and I don't really want to sound too carping. But yeah, if you're thinking of, buying this book, especially buying it online, have a think about whether it's the right book for you. Apart from anything else, it's going to cost you a lot in postage. I will come back to that book in a few months' time when I make my next multiple book review. But until then, stay well. I'm Robert Farrar, this is Tea and Tara, and I will be back next week with more of this stuff. Bye.